On this edition of the Table of Content, we talk with Michael Steele, a volunteer contributor to We Are One Body Audio Theatre. We'll talk with him about his background, his love of literature, and why he's involved with audio theater. And we will ask the all-important question, is this Man of Steel faster than a speeding bullet? Stay tuned, that's coming up next, right here on the Table of Content. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Table of Content. I am your host, Albert Saenz, and we have the joy of being with Michael Steele. Michael, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Albert, for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Michael Steele, I know you obviously through work, through our friendship, but there may be people that don't know who you are, and they'd like to know, well, who's Michael Steele? Why is he involved with audio theater? So let me hand the mic over to you, and you can give our listeners a little bit of background on kind of where you come from and how you ended up where you are.
Sure. Thank you, Albert. I appreciate that. So a little bit about myself. I was born at a very young age.
No. It's amazing.
Let's see. So I was born in Southern California. I'm one of seven. There's one girl in the family. There's 6 boys. You know, my sister cried every time my mom came home from the hospital with another boy.
I bet.
So we were homeschooled, and then at a fairly young age, I felt the call to discern a priestly vocation, studied in the seminary for a number of years, even had the chance to study in Europe for a while in Rome. I did my undergraduate in philosophy in New York, and did my license in philosophy in Rome. Discerned that it wasn't my vocation, came back home, I was working some odd jobs, met my wife, future wife-to-be. We were married in 2011 at St. Vincent Benedictine Basilica here in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And we have been blessed with 2 children and 1 on the way. Like, we are on standby. My wife is full term, 37 weeks. And, you know, every time she calls me on my cell phone, it's like, is this it?
And then she says, no, it's not it. I needed something else.
Right. Can you pick up some milk or something from the
Yeah, I understand.
Store? Right? No big deal. So we're sort of on that excited moment of pins and needles where we're waiting for baby to make his or her debut. So that's a little bit about myself.
So kind of a lot going on there from what I gather. So you're one of 7, homeschooled, had an early call. You travel the world in search of trying to discern what it is that God wants of you. You discern that you're not supposed to be a priest. You go home, you meet your now wife, you have kids on the way, you Southern California, Western Pennsylvania, and here you are now talking to me. But what I'd like to sort of dig into is sort of those earlier roots, and maybe homeschooling was a part of it. Maybe it was just something inside of you. But for anyone who goes to the website and reads your bio, there is a mention of a love of literature, a love of learning. So let's start there. You love books, yes or no?
Absolutely.
So what is it about literature that engages you so much that you actually love it?
Well, sure. Well, going back to the roots, as you mentioned there, I think it was really my 2nd grade teacher who inculcated this love of literature in me as a young boy. I remember after lunch break, every day she would read for like 30 minutes from some type of book. And what sticks out in my mind most is her reading the Chronicles of Narnia, and those just captured my imagination as a young boy.
It's a good series. It's a very good series. Thank you, C.S. Lewis. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And it captured my imagination, and just sort of that opened up my eyes to this, other type of world of imagination. And then another thing that she would do is she would offer so Miss Smith was like the most amazing teacher in the world, of course, to a second grade, kid.
Yeah, sure.
Right. But she had this old cast iron bathtub in the classroom, like, with the claws and everything on
Yeah,
the floor.
yeah.
And she had carpeted it on the inside and filled it with pillows and put it right next to a bookshelf. And the idea was, if you aced a pretest, the spelling test, she would have like spelling tests on Thursday and then the real deal on Friday. If you aced the pretest on Thursday, you could spend the test time just lounging in the tub, browsing through books, And so that was sort of, as a kid, huge motivation for me to try and, remember these words and spell them. But
And did you ace the pretest every single time?
uh, not every single time, but yeah, it was kind of a big deal. I always tried to make sure I was prepared for it. But so that, I think, was the very first inkling of books. Now, keep in mind, this is 1980s, like early 1980s. There is no internet. There are no cell phones. So, your choices for leisurely activity in terms of entertainment are television, which, by the way, we didn't have. Mom and Dad, I think that I'm getting to that, but that's another reason. Mom and Dad never had a television. So if we wanted to entertain ourselves, it was pretty much books or play outside. So when, Mom and Dad made the decision to homeschool, that was a big change in the family dynamic. It was a big change for me as well. And I struggled with it for a few years. Friends would ask me, "Why don't you go to school anymore?" And I'd be like, "Well," I'd make up these weird excuses, like, "Well, I am going to school," and and we used a particular curriculum, Seton Home Study. So it was more like a correspondence school than it was, strictly like coming up with your own curriculum. But there was a lot of reading and a lot of writing involved in that curriculum. So, which was great, because I think I have a natural proclivity to read. I love reading. And we also listened to a lot of audiobooks growing up. So I remember not just reading, but also we would go to the library and get these little cassettes, with the old, magnetic tape.
Oh,
And
yeah, I remember those.
right. So we would put those in, and we'd listen to it. I remember listening to, as well, Chronicles of Narnia audiobooks, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, those type of audio productions. And it sparked my imagination so much so I read The Hobbit, read The Lord of the Rings myself, and then read The Hobbit aloud to my family. It was one of my sort of warmest childhood memories, is reading The Hobbit aloud to the family. I think I must have been about 12 or 13 or so. And we would, sit down, and in the evenings after dinner time, and we just read a chapter or two. And it was a really nice family moment. But so coming to audio theater, well, first of all, it was great just to know that audio theater existed. I sort of was introduced to the radio side of things, and then discovered afterward, wow, there's this whole another branch of production in audio theater. And so I've always appreciated good storytelling. And I feel that in terms of its cathartic value, that reordering of the emotions to what is truly good and what is truly noble, the reordering of the emotions to their proper object, I feel that there's a real need in for good storytelling that portrays good values and sort of disposes us emotionally to pursue the good and the heroic. One of the things that emotions that I experienced growing up and reading The Lord of the Rings, for example, was I would frequently put down the book and just heave a sigh and just think, why isn't reality as exciting as this? Why can't my life be this epic adventure?
Well, I guess it could have been. You could have just run off like Bilbo and said you're going on an adventure.
Right. I'm going on barefoot and all, right? I'm
Right.
going on an adventure. It was only afterwards when I understood sort of the nature of good storytelling and writing, that every good story is based on reality, is based on that human experience of that sort of cataclysmic struggle that we have between good and evil. And so when I was introduced to the audio theater, and after I got over my fear of the microphone, it was great, and I'm looking forward to doing more. I haven't recorded a whole lot for the audio theater, but I'd like to um, be more actively involved.
Let's take a few minutes here. Let's talk about one of your last recordings specifically. Uh, you recorded a short story by John Watechko called "The Faithful Acrobat," and it's
Mm,
a telling of Saint John Bosco's life. And it's one of those kind of fun stories. You don't actually get the reveal until the end. But you hear about this young boy who was an acrobat, but he also had a zeal for God and for trying to teach others about God. And you, of course, read the story all by yourself, and you add in the voices and characterizations. So,
mm.
uh, tell me about recording that story for audio theater.
Sure. Well, first of all, the story itself is well written, and John's a great writer. He brings out those dramatic tensions. When John Bosco is a boy and he's perceiving the call to go deeper in his faith, and yet he has the very real circumstance of poverty. They just can't afford it. And then his whole dynamic and struggle with trying to come up with a solution. Well, I'll do odd jobs, I'll work, and then that's just the tying of that knot and the untying of that knot, and then onto another knot, the jealousy or the words escaping me, animosity of his brothers, not wanting him to do that, and just sort of being hardened by their sort of agricultural life. We're not meant to do anything higher. On to how does he evangelize his peers? How does he get kids to mass? And he he happened to have a sort of a talent for acrobatics, so he tightrope walks and he juggles and he gathers their attention first, and then he gives them a catechism lesson afterwards while he has their attention. And then he has the encounter with the professional acrobat who wants to sort of crowd in on his act. And then they have the competition. So, yeah, I don't want to give it all away, but, John Bosco was an amazing person, an amazing saint for working with the youth and responding to God.
Now, I don't want this particular episode to turn into a, exposition on the life of St. John Bosco, but I'm just curious because of the life that you've led, and you have St. John Bosco who feels this calling and this tug to do something more, to serve God in a greater way. And so I just have to ask the question, in reading the story, could you relate to the life of St. John Bosco to a certain degree?
Yes, I could. I'm no saint yet, but the idea of wanting to do something of transcendental and epic value with my life, I think was really on the emotional level, it was through the readings, especially Lord of the Rings. I really feel that emotionally, reading the Lord of the Rings predisposed me emotionally to try to at least hear the call of God in my heart, but then also to have that desire to do something of great value with my life. Uh, I think growing up there in Southern California, just that idea of going back to Lord of the Rings, gosh, why can't my life be as epic? And then looking around me and seeing sort of what everyone was pursuing in terms of happiness, and sparked those deeper questions in me of like, well, what is my life all about? And I figured there was also sort of a pragmatic calculation there. I figured that, okay, God, I'm going to give you the first shot at my life. And if it doesn't work out, then you can't hold it against me at the end of my life that I never gave you the first shot. So, the mind of a whatever 15, 16-year-old. And so, but there was definitely that desire to continue to follow the Lord and do what He wants. Yeah. So, and that sort of led me to discover the seminary, and had a truly beautiful experience in the seminary, getting to know Jesus Christ, not just the historical figure, but Jesus Christ Himself. So, through prayer, reflection, things like that.
Sure, sure. So here's my question, and this is where you can really kind of maybe break out the philosophy of my question. Um, so you listened to audiobooks as a child. You believe in the greatness of literature. You love to read. You get involved with audio theater. You have sort of a chance to offer back what you received as a child.
Mm.
And do you feel or do you think that there is a real importance to this type of creative work? Do you think that this sort of radio drama or audio recordings, whether it's short stories or poems or something more episodic, do you think that when done well and with the right motivation, do you think that this is an important medium?
Absolutely. Hands down, absolutely. Uh, Again, going back to the power of a story on our emotions. A story can make us cry. It can stir within us sort of those yearnings for heroism. We all like a happy ending, but a sad ending as well also has its purpose, or a tragedy as well also has its purpose. But yes, and well done, right? It has a sway over us, whether we like it or not. And I feel like there's good storytelling and there's bad storytelling.
Sure. Oh,
So,
yeah, definitely.
and I feel like a lot of contemporary storytelling is sort of poison covered by candy, or candy covered poison. The ideas, the contents they're not healthy, they're not worthwhile for our human spirit, our human nature. And yet the presentation is so snazzy and so attractive and eye catching and imaginative that we subscribe to the content without really criticizing it,
Mm-hmm.
or we take it at face value.
Most
So,
definitely. I agree with you.
and there's a couple of references I think that I think back up my thinking on that. The J.R. Tolkien wrote this beautiful work called Tree and Leaf on the purpose of fairy tales. And he coined this term called eucatastrophe, from the Greek suffix eu, meaning well or good, and catastrophe, which we all know as catastrophe, is some tragic event happening. And he says that every good fairy tale has that dynamic of a eucatastrophe. That means a greater good coming out of some type of tragic event, tragic happening. And so, and he says, just as in reality, the eucatastrophe for humanity was Adam and Eve sinning against God, destroying sort of His first plan for humanity, but then the God coming back and saying, well, all is not lost. I'm going to send you a redeemer, Jesus Christ. So that's the good that came out of the tragedy of Adam and Eve. And then even in the life of Jesus Christ, the eucatastrophe there we can see is His being killed and dying on the cross, but then rising 3 days later in His glory and power. So that was J.R.R. Tolkien's Tree and Leaf. And then G.K. Chesterton, in his Orthodoxy, chapter 4, also, chapter 4 is entitled The Ethics of Elfland. And he also talks about that power of storytelling, and the aspect of fairy tales where sort of an incomprehensible reward rests on some irrational condition. Like for Cinderella, he says it happens to be that she has all these things, but she has to be back by midnight. And that's sort of a dynamic that we face in the Christian life as well in our lives. It's like we are promised this incomprehensible reward, and yet we have these seemingly uh, conditions that sort of grate against what we would rather do. So he brings that to light as well in his orthodoxies.
Well, two excellent writers to reference, from my opinion. I think that they had great insight and also just great writings. So someone who has great insight and then can sort of put that into a work of fiction or a work of prose or poetry, I think it's a great combination for a great end product, and one that would continue to impact people decades later, if not, here we are coming up on really a century later for someone like Chesterton.
Right. What would the world be without The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings?
Well, Peter Jackson wouldn't be as wealthy.
That's for sure.
But yes, right. We would have a loss. We wouldn't know it, but there would be a great loss without someone like Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So yes, definitely an emptier world in as far as we would know it. Mm-hmm. Michael Steele, we've got to wrap this up. But as I said in the intro, I was going to ask. So we got to know: are you faster than a speeding bullet?
I would like to think so, at least mentally, but I'm afraid I'm not.
Okay. Well, as long as you're faster than a small running child, I guess you'll be okay.
Right.
You can always catch them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've got a lot of practice doing that.
So we're hoping to have you, Michael Steele, do more for audio theater in the months and years to come. If you, as a listener, would like to hear some of the recordings of Michael Steele, head over to our website at WAOB and look in the contributor bios for Michael Steele. Learn a little bit more about his life and some of his recordings that he's done for us. Michael, thanks so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you, Albert. Yes, I'm looking forward to working more closely with the audio theater and recording more in the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad that you have tuned in for this episode of The Table of Content. Always a pleasure to have you listening, and we hope that you will tune in again next time. Until then, be good, stay safe. Peace.